Greetings. Hello, everybody. Well, today I'm going to talk about climate. It's related to food, agriculture, gardening, so it's a related topic. But I want to talk about climate in relationship to civilization, which, of course, civilization is also related to agriculture, farming, etc. So, that's a step beyond the hunter-gatherer mode of human beings, is the agrarian mode. But now I look out there today, and I see the state of the world, the state of the planet, as far as the climate change we're experiencing, and well, I see patterns again. Yeah, I'm seeing patterns here because, yeah, science has been able to give us more good information about the nature of our world and the solar system and so on within my lifetime, I think, than any time previous. And actually, the last 20 years have actually been insane. The last decade is beyond belief how much. I mean, when I was a boy, they didn't believe in tectonic plates or continental drift. Okay, yeah, that was something that had been started in the early 20th century, and most people didn't think there was any validity to that. Well, now we know it all moves around. It used to be that it was only NASA and maybe the Russians had some probes out there in the solar system who were looking at things, but now we're not alone anymore. Yeah, right. I'm not talking about the space aliens either. We're not alone because we have the European Space Agency, the Indian Space Agency. China has probes out there all over the place, and because we can buy into small satellites and we can have Musk launch them for us and so on, there's all sorts of concerns and interests that are out there orbiting around the planet and so on. But we know more about this solar system, the planets in it, and the moons of those planets and so on than we ever knew. And we learned all of that pretty much in the last 10 years, 20 years. The Cassini probe, Huygens probe into Titan, Voyager leaving the solar system, and so on. This is all sent back. I've got a probe orbiting the sun. We're doing a solar probe. There's all sorts of stuff going on right now. I don't even know what it all is. I try to keep track. But the information that we're gaining from all this keeps coming back at us. And I find it odd that we have so much opposition to science, because right now we are in the richest scientific period, I think, of human history. And something that we've been able to do in recent years, and that's to bore the ice sheets on Greenland, Antarctica, and also to read ancient tree rings. In the process of reading the accumulations of ice and glaciers on, say, Greenland, where it's ongoing frozen history for centuries and centuries, and looking at ancient trees, we are able to determine what the climate patterns had been at a certain period of time in the history of the Earth. We can read it like a thermometer and a calendar when you're looking at these things. There was some Kari pine tree that's, I don't know, well over 40,000 years old it is, I know, was found in New Zealand. It's not the only one. They found a few of them. They're buried. They've been buried for about 40,000 years. They have records of climate that go way, way, way back. And they were fairly well preserved. They were able to read the rings, and so they could see things that we could never see before. Well, fortunately, if you take the patterns of changing climate on Earth and you match them up against the collapse of civilizations on our planet, Well, what you'll find out is they fit real neatly. Yeah, it's a real good fit. Okay, that climate change is one of the number one reasons why civilizations on Earth collapse. And if we take our known history or assumed history of the humans, and we take the history of the climate here on the planet through ice readings and tree rings, we put the two together, and what happens is the fall of the Roman Empire coincides with many ice ages. The fall of Khmer civilization in South Asia, the Angkor Wat people, again, climate change, and so on. The patterns, they fit nicely. I mean, the Roman Empire, for instance, is an excellent example. It's so perfect that it's scary. The rise of Rome, its building up and establishment of the civilization, coincided with the rather warm and wet period of weather that went on for several hundreds of years. And this warm, wet weather favored agricultural crops. Yeah, humans eat. And weather affects the crops that we raise. And so Rome rose up on a system of really, really good weather. And no matter what anybody else other than Napoleon has to say about it, Rome had its conquering armies, etc., etc. They were a very powerful, warlike nation. But, like Napoleon said, army travels on its stomach, man. Yeah, and that's so true. It doesn't matter how strong you are, and really how many nuclear warheads you even have these days. If you can't feed people, things fall apart. And that's really what holds civilization together, is the fact that we have enough food and water to take care of the populations that we have in any given area. So, Rome rose up on this warm, wet period of climate. But around the 6th century, there was a period of climatic instability. There was also barbarian hordes attacking Rome, and the civilization slowly crumbling little by little. It did not happen overnight, but things began to fall apart, and there was a tremendous amount of volcanic activity on this planet between 530 and 540. And that is also coincides with the fall of Rome in the 6th century. It created a mini ice age, or they call it the antique little ice age, I believe. It lasted about 150 years. There was a period of time where they really couldn't grow crops properly in northern latitudes at all. And so it was against the period of time when we had climate change due to huge volcanic eruptions that Rome came down. But there was one other factor. That was also coinciding with the rise of the bubonic plague in Europe. It was also coinciding with the globalization of smallpox. I imagine these things came about because of all the moving of people across the planet at that time, and they were carrying diseases back and forth with them, and so things got into places they'd never been before. And so here we have a situation where it wasn't just the weather. We look at the barbarians that stormed Rome, and who say, oh, well, the barbarians took the civilization down. It collapsed from the inside, They became, self-absorbed, arrogant, way too fat, and weren't paying attention to things properly anymore, which is true. Decay from inside does happen with societies, and Rome was no exception. But they were so overrun by various diseases within their urban areas, because they were an urban society. They built cities, and they did not have what it took to control the diseases that circulated inside their cities. And so average life expectancy had dropped off dramatically in Rome, and then the bubonic plague hit, and perhaps smallpox also had an impact on this, as well as the fact that the climate changed and they couldn't raise crops properly. So, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, it sounds real familiar. In fact, but if we take a look, say for instance, the Mayans. The Mayans are mysterious. That's in Mexico, Central America. We don't know really exactly what happened. They really just kind of seem to have disappeared out of history off the face of the earth. But there's some pretty good ideas here that the Mayans used a tremendous amount of wood. Two reasons they cut forests. One was for ever-increasing population. They had a population explosion, and they had to feed it. And so they cut down trees to create more fields for growing corn, which was the predominant. Maize was the major food crop that they raised. Also the cutting of the trees was used for the making of lime. They would burn the wood, create lime, and the lime was used to whiten the walls of their structures and so on. Everything was apparently whitewashed at one point, so the use of lime was extremely important. And the way they got lime was they burned the trees. Well, once they burned off the trees and they had a huge population, and suddenly drought hit. And now drought, in this case, would have been more or less human caused, it appears. Time frame for the Mayan collapse, about 900, somewhere right around 900 CE. Again, there was a drought period, and the lack of the trees. The trees comb the clouds, they comb sea fogs and so on. Trees respirate and they make clouds, and so the more trees you have, generally speaking, the more likely it is that you're going to get rainfall. Well, when we cut all the trees off, you end up with desertification, and what they did may have actually been responsible for the lack of rain that ruined the crops and so on. So here again, it appears that the mysterious fall of the Mayan was because of climate change. Again, the Khmer civilization, that's the Angkor Wat people, they also had huge populations. They had agricultural problems, apparently. It was drought during the period, but it was interspersed with huge monsoon rains. Does that sound a little familiar to anybody? Yeah, it seems like we're having this wild fluctuation of weather. Yeah, they say the Khmer civilization probably collapsed on wild fluctuations of weather. I don't know off the top of my head what the reasons for that was at the time, but it does look like that's how they lost it, was fluctuations in their crops that failed. They weren't able to feed people. You have the same situation, too, with the Vikings in Greenland. There was a period of time when it got so cold in that region that they had to give up the settlements they had in Greenland. Now, there was no huge civilization in Greenland that was Viking, but the Viking colonies were lost. Again, climate change in the weather. Here we have volcanic activity during the time of the Roman Empire that put so much dust and CO2 and stuff into the atmosphere that the sun was obscured, and so they went into this little ice age. And so, of course, when things become uncomfortable on the planet, people tend to rise up. They're not getting what they need, they go get it. And so, we had all these attacks on the Roman Empire from outside because people apparently were beginning to suffer. But the idea that the bubonic plague, the introduction of it into Europe, and possibly smallpox, also played a part in the collapse of Rome, is pretty scary, because we're looking at perfect parallels here, folks. We are definitely experiencing climate change at the moment. You really got to have your head stuck in the sand not to admit that one. Now, whether it's human induced or it's not human induced, in a way, it doesn't matter that much. It exists. That's the important point here. If it is human induced and there's something we can do about it, then, cutting CO2, cutting our carbon emissions, all great stuff. It's something I have done here. I don't feel like participating in the madness, and so we have cut our carbon emission here. So we're probably sequestering more carbon than we're using here on this farm in our lives. But that isn't going to solve the world's problem. You have this social upheaval that's going on, and of course, Putin decides he's got to start wars on top of it. It's not pandemic and climate change, not enough for him. He needs a war too, which again falls right into the pattern, man. If you look at the NATO and civilized world looking towards him, this man's a barbarian, and there is no difference except he's got a nuke warhead, and he does ride a horse, but he doesn't ride one into battle. They ride tanks and armored cars. But yeah. Yeah, I tell you, the parallels are just entirely too perfect. And the fact is that, well, you can look back and say, well, history can repeat itself, doesn't have to repeat itself. Well, I'm telling you, factors like climate change and introduced diseases are almost always nearly 100% towards the collapse of any given civilization. The Amazon, which, as we know it, is this pristine rainforest, the Patriotic culture existed there with roads, cities, agriculture that could sustain, and so on, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of people existed in the Amazon in a civilized fashion. It just took one Spanish explorer that got there a couple hundred years ahead of everybody else, went up the Amazon, saw the culture, said hello to everybody, was impressed, coughed, and probably God knows what else he did, and the next people that came from Europe went up the Amazon, found nothing but primitive tribes running around loincloths with blowguns and jungle. They didn't find this. They thought the guy was a liar. His history was buried for hundreds of years, and only now, because of satellites, clearing of forests, LIDAR, and so on, we're actually able to see that there was an entire civilization in there. And in their case, it was pretty much European diseases put them flat down, killed almost the entire works. A whole culture that existed in the Amazon wasn't even there when we went back 200 years later, wiped off the face of the planet. Yeah, it's diseases, and so I'm saying that, people have sworn oh no, it's climate change, no such thing as climate change, blah, 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 blah. They fought that one, and it's mostly, the voices of fossil fuel producers. They want to make their money, and they don't want anybody getting in the way. And if their product is causing problems in the climate, that's bad for business. And of course, they stuff money in the pockets of the people in Washington to pay for elections, And so that game is completely rigged. This guy's paying no attention to this, yet it's why Rome fell, man. Yeah, you want to know where the heads of your leaders are actually at? You go ask the guy that you elected what he knows about climate change, and and how important it is. And of course, there's been lunacy about masks and vaccines and the COVID. I mean, that's absolute lunacy. They're And again, if people understood that the bubonic plague and climate change took down Rome, well, maybe they would wear their mask. Maybe they wouldn't argue about it so much. Maybe they wouldn't be so, oh, I don't know about the science, and so on. Maybe. Just maybe. There's also maybe a juggernaut that's completely unstoppable. I tend to think that because we have brains, that we have critical thinking, we have intellect, we have our logic circuits, so we can kind of look at stuff and try to determine the best course of action, that we could look backwards over time and go, gosh, that crazy green garden guy's right. All these civilizations seem to have fallen due to either climate change or disease or both. We're in a period right now where, wow, we got climate change and disease, global. History doesn't have to repeat itself. People who are aware, as for instance, I have railed against so much of the social unrest that's occurred. I blame a lot of it actually on the virus, and people told me I'm psychotic because I said that. Doesn't matter. But social unrest is what brings about the destruction of societies. And when you combine it with a disease and climate change, and then go out in the street carrying guns and start screaming and yelling about stuff, especially when most of it is really not at all important, thank you. Very little value to it, And the whole mask thing, as soon as the pandemic's over, the mask thing's going to be over, as far as whether the vaccine was tested, yeah, it's been tested by now, people. Yeah, it's been tested, Maybe it wasn't when they first put it on the shelf there, but it's been tested now. And so there's no argument left there as far as whether it's dangerous, and is untested. That argument's moot and will become more and more moot all the time. Same thing goes with the mask. As we take them off, go ahead, yell about masks. I don't care, but it was a worthless waste of people's energy and time. It's just exactly the election being a fraud, okay? Total waste of the civilization's time here. Complete waste. We have a good system, and it's been upheld over and over and over and over that there were no major problems here. The entire thing was a fraud, And, I can't tell people get smart and don't fall for this stuff. If you're dumb enough to fall for it, you're dumb enough to fall for it. That's all there is to it. But I would hope that you would understand the implications of what you're doing. You're at a critical moment right now in history. It's a perfect pattern. You want to see Rome fall again? Let me get my violin. Okay? Yeah. Just let me get my fiddle, and we'll see about that. It wouldn't take much. So I see it as a period of time where a patriotic American, a person who cares about his life and the nation, would more try to hold things together, try to embrace things, and try not to create divisions in people, to try to bring it together, to understand that we're all in this together. And if you start rocking the boat too darn hard, it's going to go over, and we're all going to go over with it. Yeah, that's how it works, man. I find it rather sad that apparently there aren't a lot of people that really understand this. They don't know that climate change collapses societies. They're not aware that most societies are caved in due to infectious diseases. They don't understand that you split a society up from the inside out, I'm sure that some of the people out there right now are fully cognizant of what they're up to. Yeah, they want to ruin things. Well, trust me, nothing is that bad. Nothing is that bad here, at least, that anybody should want to have to do something like that. No one ever gets everything they want. Yeah. And if you think you need to get everything you want, you really don't belong in this society. You're in the wrong place, man. It doesn't work that way. We live in a democracy. Hopefully, we will continue to live in a democracy, and it will continue to function. And yeah, hopefully, run by committee. Hang loose.